First of all, I would like to thank everyone for being here and for participating in this future, which is the oil and gas we have in Africa. And my presentation will be a bit of a mixture between my practice as a legal counsel and the experience I actually drink by being almost graduated from Oxford University next week in global business. So it's a mixture of legal and global business. So that means that going forward, you're going to see I'll try to bring some new concepts to at least a few of us related to the general counsel role transformation and the concept of the added share value in the region. So, what is the importance we have to give to Africa? Just trying to be more directed to the SSA region, because that's actually where we're going to speak more on this presentation. What I have seen is that sometimes we have a tendency, and this goes to companies, governments, have a tendency to incur to some specific gaps. And from my studying, which is I've studied and I completed a investigation in February, I noticed that in this part of the world, some common mistakes are being made whenever there is a business strategy drafted to go to a new country or to continue in that new country in SSA. A few of them I enumerated there, being, for instance, the absence of understanding what should be considered local content. I actually don't like the word local content, so I prefer to use local first. Not sure if that exists already, but if not, I'm making new concepts here. So local first should be seen not only as a global strategy from the companies, but also from the governments. So usually when we talk about local content, we just look at from the government side. But when I talk about local first, I'm seeing in all angles. So another thing that I would like to highlight is the fact that many times there is a tendency to skip some compliance requirements, when along the way we're going to see that the fact that we didn't follow those compliance requirements is going to be more costly. And of course, in terms of the due diligence, many times we see the due diligence which is made in headquarters or along the way, and then when we go to the country itself, we've seen that some small big details were lacked. And also another gaps that I just enumerated there, where I would like to highlight, for instance, sometimes we see a kind of a lack of trust between the partners as well, since the beginning. That's not a very good way to start. And what I would like to bring today, and I would like that everyone in this room would be aware, is about the new concept of the added share value. What is adding share value? Also, would like to highlight the importance that should be given to small, medium, and big local suppliers. And of course, protection of human rights and the so-called institutional voids. That's another new concept. I will explain a bit later. But just on the general side, when we talk about institutional voids, I'm talking about the lack of some institutional, technical, and human capacity we find in countries, like bureaucracy, problems, lack of the state not being so strong. So that means that sometimes along the way in those holes, that's where we find the opportunities for some, which not always opportunities for the country. So what can we do different as lawyers? And this is more related to general counsel role, but also applies to any lawyer in any law firm. We have a role. Our role in the companies that we are working as inside counsel or in an external law firms is a transformational role. I'm sure you've heard about this concept, because if you go to the United States, 92% of the lawyers and the CEOs know what is a lawyer transformational role. We are supposed to be providing more than mere legal advising. We are supposed to provide the best recommendations. We are supposed to be considered business partners. If you go to Europe, you're going to find some kind of a mixture of understanding the transformational role of the lawyer. I would say go to the countries. You're going to find some countries that consider that lawyers actually are business partners, and some other countries that not so much. Now let's transition to Africa. Are we transformational? Are we lawyers transformational in the companies we are working on, or are you just providing mere recommendations? So first of all, I would like to call to the transformational role we have in the companies. Second is in terms of governments. Government needs to connect and align to attract the right investors, not any investor. Sometimes I say it's better not to have some specific investors, because if they don't have the idea that in this case we are expecting to add share value to the country, we're not supposed to have that investor in the country unless he has those kind of intents. So another concept, hopefully not a new one, it's corporate diplomacy. Not sure how many of you have heard about this concept, but corporate diplomacy is something that is supposed to be existing since the beginning of the relationship of the company that goes to a new country. So there's supposed to be an engagement with the government in a way that it makes transparent what each party expects to obtain from that investment. That's corporate diplomacy. So, innovation. We know that without innovation, we are not going to be able to do the change. And in Africa, it's expected to have innovative business strategies. Sustainable and collaborative relationships. How that can be happening. That can happen with the so-called shared value. So this is where what it can be considered new for some of you. We know that basically the principle is profit-driven. We also know that we went to another phase where we talk about the corporate social responsibility. Now, what I would like to challenge each of us is to go to a third phase, the phase of the added share value. This is not a concept of mine. This is Porter, which is an economist. And basically, the added share value says, okay, companies should invest. Companies should have their profit-driven mindset in the beginning. But then there is a need to add something called economic value to the communities that the investment is being made. It's a win-win. It's not giving some money without seeing what's coming back from that corporate social responsibility. It's more than that. And that way, the investment can be considered sustainable. Also would like to bring up some complexity to the issue when we talk about the technology and the fact that we know that sometimes it's a challenge to do that sharing of the know-how that is particularly from the investor to the local communities. So what are the challenges I already mentioned regarding the governments in general? Governments must actually strengthen the institutional, technical, and human capacity and follow up the so-called content-first strategy. This implies to have clear procedures and legislation that can actually accommodate and foster that kind of environment. Well, I just enumerated a few gaps there. I'm sure there are some that are not there, and this is basically based on the understanding that I have with my experience, my professional experience, and my investigation. If you look at that, of course, the order can be discussed, but I included there as the first gap usually seen is education, or lack of it. But there are others that can be considered as gaps from the governments in general. I would like to also call the attention to the fact that we sometimes see the so-called institutional voids. You see, there is work to be done in the countries to strengthen the state, but it's a process. What are the big five, I call it big five strategies of global companies? Just to call your attention for, each of that line would deserve more than a half an hour to explain. I'm just bringing the concepts, food for thoughts, so that we can after have a kind of a more productive and insightful discussion. First, why, how, where, and the global, regional, local business strategy. Second, economy talk about the integrated market and non-market strategy. We have to consider what we don't know. We need to include, for instance, the context whenever there is a new investment coming. Sometimes we just go with what we know and we forget what we don't know. And what we don't know of that country is sometimes the base of the successful strategies. Third concept, the corporate diplomacy, I already brought to the table. The fourth one is related to some frameworks. As lawyers, we are seen as not being very knowledgeable of these concepts of economy. And I would like to challenge you, when you have some time, to take a look at this adding share value scorecard, which is very interesting, and another frameworks that we find in economics, like CAGE and the triangle. I won't go into that detail, it will take more than 3 hours. Finally, the scenario planning. What is scenario planning? We do that all the time as lawyers. We just don't think so much often that we are doing scenario planning. I don't know how many plans do you do on your day-to-day work. I usually go until plan Z. So I have plan A, plan B, plan C. This is scenario planning. So when we are investing, we have to consider a lot of variants that we are not considering in the beginning to make sure that the investment actually achieves the goal. We cannot, and in these modern times that we've been seeing and with these changes that we've been perceiving, like Brexit, Trump, and other unexpected or maybe expected results, it's up to us to start thinking that this is more than scenario planning. This is reality. So, general counsels, external law firm counsels, legal team are supposed to have a transformational role. How can we do that? We just have to see the old model and take a look to the new models. And the new model doesn't mean that, as I mentioned in the IBA event in April, that JVs are dead. I just say now to clarify that the old concept of JVs is dead, but the new concept can still have a break if it's done appropriately. So besides the JV models, I usually say that as lawyers, we have to look to other innovative solutions to the companies we are working in. And many times, besides the JVs, when they are not mandatory, there are other models that can be used. And I suggest, for instance, the local supplier development model. Individual or ecosystem can be a way out. Both win in the share value path that I'm referring. As you can see there in this slide, this is a very busy one, and the expectation is that after this initial conversation, we go more to the details. I just want to highlight that we lawyers, we have many areas where we are supposed to do the difference. And just want to highlight the second one. Just consider that the JVs have a beginning, may have a mid, and then they may also end. Again, scenario planning. We have to be ready, and we have to make sure that the sharing the agreements we've done are actually adjusted to that kind of changes. I'm just putting here some examples of countries that I've worked, and I've actually had to do the table to understand exactly what are the requirements. I just picked 3 countries, like Equatorial Guinea, Angola, and Ghana, where we have to make sure that we make the right partner selection, we have the right governance, whenever we're creating a JV or any other model. I call it modern and successful local partnership, kind of to do a division between what used to be the old JVs, where sometimes we've seen in this part of the world as a mere transference of wealth to a few. Technology transfer, it's a challenge. How can we do this in a way that actually protects both the company know-how and the knowledge of the local communities? This is the concept I'm bringing to the table today, the added share value, which actually includes policies and operating practices that enhance that competitiveness of a company while advanced economic and social conditions to the communities. And to end, a summary, where I would like to highlight again the huge role we have as lawyers in inside counsels or external law firms to transform. Thank you, everyone.